Hello.
Have to record it to the correct location. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Melissa Johnson. I'm the Director for the Division of Regional Operations with the Office of Child Support Services. I'm joined today by Kimberly Curtis. Kimberly might want to give a wave. Kimberly is the Director for our Division of Policy and Training, and also Mike Gens, the Director for the Division of Program Innovation. We're so happy to have you joining us today as we're going to talk about some of the flexibilities that can improve your activities in the child support program. As I mentioned, we are recording today's presentation. We'll share it out via email and also post it to our website. In a minute, when it's Kimberly's turn to talk and not mine, I will load some information and a copy of the slides into the chat during the presentation today. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So during today's session, we're going to go over a few options for your child support program. We're going to talk about incentive exemptions, ways you might want to spend your incentives that are outside the normal program operation. Section 1115 waivers, and then also Section 466 statutory exemptions. We'll provide the relevant authority links so you can provide more information because, again, this is set for an hour. I know we're not going to get everything covered that you might want to know. And then we'll wrap up also with a short discussion of flexibilities that exist without actually needing to pursue an exemption or a waiver. So as I mentioned, we're going to start with just kind of an overview of what's the authority and guidance. So state child support agencies receive incentives based on their performance in 5 measures, and these funds must be reinvested back into your child support program, or they can be used for activities that will improve the state's child support program. In the column on the far left, you can find additional information on the incentive exemptions. This is found in Section 458F of the Social Security Act, and IM 1802 and AT 2001 both provide relevant information around incentive exemptions. When I do put this PDF of the slides in the chat, these are active links, so you'll be able to quickly click on those to pull up that additional information. In the middle column, we have some of the resource information about Section 1115 waivers. These waivers can waive certain program requirements or even funding restrictions to allow your agency to carry out time-limited activities that improve children's financial well-being. The waivers are available for both states and tribes. As you know, our witty name says, they're found in Section 1115, which is why we call them Section 1115 waivers. And finally, in the far right column, we're going to talk a little bit about Section 466 exemptions. Again, we have this named appropriately because it's found in Section 466 of the Social Security Act. In that section, there are 21 statutory requirements for state child support programs, but you can request exemptions from some of these mandatory laws by demonstrating that the enactment of the law or use of any procedure required would not increase the efficiency or effectiveness of the program. And AT 1907 does provide more information about these exemptions. So we're going to get started, and I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly to talk about incentive exemptions.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So let's talk about incentive exemptions. States receiving incentives cannot receive federal financial participation on those incentives, but can use those funds for activities not otherwise allowable with child support funds. States can determine the amount they want to invest in the exemption activity, but must also apply to OCSS for an exemption before the funds are used for the activity. States can request an exemption to reinvest incentives in a non-40 activity for a period of up to 5 years. And for multi-year requests after the initial approval, the state must submit a request for continued approval annually. And for more information, go ahead and take a look at that AT 20-01, which extended the duration that states may request an exemption to reinvest incentive payments in the non-40 activity for a period of up to 5 years. And for the multi-year request, just note, states only need to submit a request for continued approval that require less detailed information than the initial request. Next slide, please. Requesting an incentive exemption, the process. So you're going to send a letter requesting approval to use incentive payments for activities not eligible for reimbursement under Title 4D to the policy and training team at the email address posted on this slide. Your letter must include the following information. So you're going to want to put specific detailed information on the activity the incentive payment will fund, the amount of incentive funds to be spent on the activity, how the activity will improve the effectiveness or efficiency of the state's child support program. The letter must also show a clear connection to and collaboration with the state child support program for the activity and the time period for the activity, again, maximum of 5 years. And you're also going to want to put in the name, the phone number, and email address of a contact person who can provide additional information of the request if that is needed. Once we receive the request, we will review the letter and notify you of the decision to grant the exemption. Next slide. Some examples of incentive exemptions that we have approved include the non-custodial parent employment and training programs, fatherhood support programs, as well as fatherhood summits, expanded access and visitation programs, so allowing for access and visitation hotlines or supervised visitation. And then finally, we have mediation services as another example of use of incentive funds. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Right.
Hey, Mike, before you go there, should we
Sure.
pause maybe and see if there's any questions real quick on incentive exemptions?
Good idea.
So if you have any questions, please feel free at any time. You can place those in the chat, or if you wanted to raise your hand, that would provide ease for us to know to call on you. We'll just pause for a minute to see if there's anything at the moment.
I see Arlette has her hand up.
Yes.
I would like to know if funds can be used to work with ex-offender programs or incarcerated programs.
So it could be. So what you would want to do is determine how you want to use the funds, what the activity would be, and then again, using the guidelines for those items that are needed in the request letter. Thank you, Melissa. It very well could be. One of the things I would recommend is reaching out to the policy and training team so that we can walk through what it is that you are trying to use your incentive funds for.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I don't see any further questions. So Mike, if you want to proceed, I'll move the slides for you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone's having a good holiday season so far. I'm happy to come and talk to you about the Section 1115 waivers. They often get conflated with the Section 1115 grants. So today I'm going to give you some quick facts on the 1115 waiver process, give you an overview on how to apply for a waiver project, which will include our newly updated online resource page. And I'm going to provide you with some example of project topics. Go to the next slide, please. While you already did there. So just as I promised, here's some of the fun and quick facts about waivers. That they are, you can request a waiver at any time. They're non-competitive, which is a significant difference from the Section 115 grant process, where we would issue a notice of funding opportunity, also known as the NOFO. It's not necessary to follow a funding announcement on topic or requirements. The world is really your oyster to choose the topic you want to explore. And that there's also opportunities for learning community calls and evaluation services as well. So for states and tribes, it operates a little bit differently. The state share is still 34%, and then the 66% federal funding. As with the normal child support program operations, the tribal program is 100% federal, as with their normal child support program operations. And also with the states, this is becoming a little bit more, we're seeing a little bit more of this is using a public-private partnership, such as a foundation or other private funding to contribute to the state's share. And then the maximum amount is $2 million for the duration of your project, and it runs usually typically 2 to 5 years, depending on the cost and the type of project that you're doing. Next slide, please, Melissa. Oh, sorry, was freezing on my end there. That's weird.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I totally froze for a sec. So now that you have an idea, the way to request some of these waivers couldn't really be any easier. We recently launched a waiver resource page on our website. The page provides a lot of useful resources on the waiver project, how they're funded, the application and evaluation process, and the technical assistance that's available. And that technical assistance is available before you even have to submit an application. You could simply give us a call, send us an email through the DPI mailbox, which you can see. Well, I'll share with you. We can maybe drop it in the chat later. Is ocss.dpi@acf.hhs.gov, and we can put that out there as well in the chat. But you could send us an email, and we can set up a time to talk with you about your idea before you even put anything down on paper. And we can work with you from the beginning all the way up to the end. So as you can see on the slide there, some of the items that your application must include, and it can be in any format. We do have a suggested template out there on the website, but you can really, as long as it includes all this information, we can work with it. But we do need to understand the goals and the objectives, the requirements, where you're going to be doing this, the caseload, project description, communication plan. Evaluation is important, implementation, your staffing, and your budget. All of those are important, and we'll work with you on all of those. Typically in the first year, most of the project we receive have a planning year in the first year. And then it's really the implementation is in years 2 through 5. But again, that all depends on the type of project that you might have. Next slide, please, Melissa. Some of the examples, ones that we're seeing or have seen in the past, these are just a limited idea of what you can do, but they're the employment and training programs, fatherhood, motherhood, co-parenting, legal services to establish parenting orders, fatherhood, or responsible parenting programs. And again, we are oftentimes just reading over concept papers that a state or tribe might submit to us to get ideas and feedback, and we're happy to work with you through the process to feel that you have an application that you want to submit to us formally. Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll pause again to see if you have any questions. I did place a lot of things in the chat while everyone else has been talking. I'll slow down in the chat once I have to talk again. I did put a link to our KnowledgeWorks website. On the KnowledgeWorks website, you can find an example of an incentive exemption request, and also I believe there's 2 1115 waiver requests. Our KnowledgeWorks website is really about employment and training, so you're going to find both of those are relevant to the employment and training type activities, but that website's in the chat for you. I also dropped in a link to the new Section 1115 waiver webpage that Mike mentioned in his conversation, as well as the email address that Mike referenced for DPI. And so I'll pause. Any questions for anyone at the moment on 1115 waivers? Yes, ma'am. Arlette?
I'm sorry, I just had one question. So do we have to, can we have a rough draft and have a meeting to go over our proposal, or do you need us to have it completely 100% ready to go?
Now you can have a rough draft. You could even have just an idea in your head that you want to share to see where it would go. We'll work with you from the start to finish, and we can give you some technical assistance on things that we've seen that have worked before, or maybe steer you away from areas that we know have typically not been that fruitful for other waiver requests that we've received.
Okay, and then would we be able to have like meetings along the way as we're developing this proposal?
100%. So we'll work with you all the way. And then that doesn't stop there. If your a project ends up getting approved, there's monthly meetings that we have with you to get updates on how the project is going, provide you other assistance where you might be running into roadblocks or you need other assistance on. But yeah, we'll work with you from all the way prior to an idea to all the way through implementation.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you. Michael, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks. I heard, Mike, you mention the private funding. If a state is wanting or needing to use private funding for what would be typically a 4D fundable activity, but your 33% is actually just going to come from private funding, is a waiver just for that reason necessary?
Well, it sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, and which I might not be, but it sounds like if you're doing allowable activity, that really wouldn't be under the waiver. The waivers are for certain program requirements that we can waive, or something that might not be eligible for regular 4D funding. So if it's something that's already eligible, I don't think the waiver would be what you're looking at, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, that is my question. Yeah, if a foundation or somebody wants us, to provide a particular kind of service that is 4D fundable, but we ourselves don't necessarily have the funding readily available, but they're willing to offer it, then I was just trying to figure out if that by itself requires us to get a waiver to use private funding, but it's sounding like the answer is no to that. So thank you.
I'm sorry, I have another question if that's okay.
Yes.
So typically the 34% funding share, do you know exactly where that amount would come from? Since the 66% is coming from you, typically where is that funding being accessed from?
The state share?
Yes, the state funding share, which is the 34%.
It would be from your normal, that'd be something when you apply as part of your budget, you would know, what part of it would be covered under the 66%, and then the normal, it'd be kind of like the normal child support program operations when you're submitting your expenditures.
So it's like a set aside amount?
Well, you would send to us as part of your project when, you get to that stage of budget of whatever, you think the project is going to cost. You break it out over the 5 years for each year. And then from there, there would be the 66% that the federal government would kick in under the Section 1115, and then the remaining 34% would be the state share of that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you for all the great questions so far. There's nothing else at the minute. I'll go ahead and move down. Wait, we have another in the chat, Mike. Lily has posted a question. Just to clarify, that means that non-4D function can be matched if 34% is paid by another state office funding. Mike, do you want to field that one and put your waiver?
Just trying to understand.
Do you see it in the chat?
They see it. Yeah, I'm trying to understand paid by another state office funding.
So I can give you an example. For example, so the Department of Corrections, they have a re-entry program, and we have a waiver for non-4D project, and all the funding comes from DOC, Department of Corrections. That can trigger a 34% for state share, but that again, that's from Department of Correction funding, pulling a 66% federal match. Is that correct?
So you're saying, just so it makes sure I'm understanding. So if you're saying if your project you were going to do something with your Department of Corrections, that they were the ones putting in the 34%, not the state.
It will be their state funding where they asked for funding through their general funding and not through child sports general funding.
Be interesting. I haven't seen that yet, so I'd like to. Maybe we can talk offline a little bit more about this, and I can look at this a little bit if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Lily. All right. If there's no other questions, now it's my turn. So we're going to jump into section 466 exemptions. So if a state can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the secretary, usually through sharing data that may pertain to your caseload, processing time, like administrative costs, or maybe your collections, what your average collections are, what they could be, or maybe what you're doing doesn't impact your collections. But any data and estimates that could show that the enactment of a required law or the use of a required procedure or procedures wouldn't increase the effectiveness and the efficiency of your program, then the secretary through OCSS is authorized that we could exempt that requirement. It is subject to continuing review and possible termination if circumstances change. So I'm not going to go over every 21 exemptions. I did provide a link in the slides, but I just wanted to highlight some of them that are out there. So for example, some of the things that are out here in the 21 statutory requirements include income withholding, state income tax offset, liens against real or personal property, procedures concerning paternity establishment, reporting arrearages to credit bureaus, recording social security numbers. A lot of times it specifically calls out like professional license, driver's license, occupational licenses, recreational licenses. If you think it's a license, it's probably got that on there. And maybe like authority to withhold or suspend driver's licenses or restrict licenses. Those are just some of the 21 different categories that are out there that either have required procedures or required laws for a state to have. And these exemptions are approved generally up to a 5-year period, but I'm going to highlight something about that. So when you want to request an exemption, the initial request would come in with a cover letter. All these requests come in now through the online state plan portal. And you would attach documentation for the particular state plan page that's relevant for that required operation. In the state plan portal, it's state plan pages 2.12- and then they're dashed like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the applicable series of pages for these 466 requirements that you would be attaching your justification, your documentation, and your cover letter to that plan page to ask for an exemption or to renew an exemption. There are 3 types of exemptions, and I say this, but I also say don't panic trying to figure out which one you're going to fall under, because when you submit a request for an exemption, the Division of Policy of Training is going to review everything and they're going to make a determination as to which category of exemption this falls under. So for instance, we have the authority exemptions, and these are usually 2 types of exemptions that requires and relieves the state for something to enact a law or a procedure. There's one that's a categorical authority exemption. It doesn't have to be renewed, and that's state income tax. We have a number of states within our country that don't have state income tax. So rather than having to come pass a law or anything about offsetting it, they have one of these 466 exemptions against state income tax. The other might be where the state may already have an existing law or authority for some procedures. And so that might be a way to also have an authority exemption. There's also the exemptions to not implement a procedure. And so in order to have this type of an exemption, the state's you're going to have to provide a description of your existing method of operating or an existing procedure that makes that unnecessary. You need to also submit evidence that the implementation of that requirement, that law or procedure, would not increase the efficiency and effectiveness of your program. And so that one would be one that would typically be over a 5-year period that it's showing that not cost effective. And data also should be provided that would show the estimated collections from and the cost of implementing that procedure if that's appropriate for what you're requesting. And then the final type of exemption is an exemption to operate something similar, but not necessarily the same. So this might be a state's already implemented a required law, but wishes to change its law or procedure to an alternate procedure that would be just as efficient and effective. In that case, you need to describe what this alternate procedure or law would be, including, identification as to how that still kind of conforms with the statutory and regulatory requirements, and describe what this new alternate procedure or law would be. It would, you need to address how you're handling and processing the cases, and also, evidence that the implementing it in the way it's written as the mandatory statutory way would not increase your efficiency and effectiveness. I think I've said that about 3 or 4 times, not increasing efficiency and effectiveness. So that's a recurrent theme in these type of exemptions that you're going to ask for. So here are some of the exemption examples that I've mentioned, and I divided them out by the category just to kind of help you see how they've gone. Authority exemption, I already mentioned state income tax. You don't have it, you don't have to set that up, but you do need an exemption. Another one is, I mentioned paternity procedures. So it's required that you would have procedures, and one of the procedures is about jury trials, that there's no right to a jury trial in paternity actions. But in this example, a state Supreme Court had already ruled that there was no right to a jury trial in these type of matters. And so they received an authority exemption saying, since, there's already state court precedent that this is not required, that you wouldn't have to then, that they were given an exemption from creating those procedures, saying we don't have the right to a jury trial. Other ones about exemptions to not implement a procedure. I think there's a number of states that don't collect social security numbers, maybe for recreational licenses. Maybe there's an alternate ID number collected, or maybe it's just like the last 4. So that one is one that also we see as an exemptions fairly often. There's, I also have seen recently some states that either have or are renewing that they're not going to have or implement any opportunities for good cause or alternate arrangements to income withholding. Income holding is the way it's going to happen. And then finally, to operate something similar, maybe they have a different way of dealing with rescissions of paternity acknowledgements. And then one of the newer ones is there on that bottom right corner, which is not implementing procedures to report arrearages to credit bureaus. So on this one, the states that I think I've seen on this, they have something that does kind of the same type of work that's still just as efficient and effective and may get more collections than the report to credit bureau. So they had asked for a 466 exemption to not report those arrearages to the credit bureau. So before I go on to the next section, again, I will pause to see if there's any questions around 466 exemptions. All right, let me off easier than Kim and Mike. So I am going to turn it over to Mike to have a discussion with you on, do I even really need one of these items that you just talked about?
Well, thanks again, Melissa. And so, yeah, after hearing all this, you may be wondering, do I really need any of these flexibilities? And so I'm going to throw a little bit more at you around this, and to tell you that there are flexibilities that we have that are just within the core part of the program that don't require seeking any kind of exemption, 1115 waiver or 466 exemption. An idea you have to innovate or enhance your program, you might already have the resources right there that you need. And so I guess one way you could kind of think about it is, it's almost like when you get home and you're going to cook dinner and you think, can I just grab what I have in the cupboard and just make something here? Or do I need to go out to the store to get something really to spice this thing up and really make it work? So it's maybe one little analogy that I was thinking about the other day, is trying to distinguish the differences. If you go to the next slide, like you already did, thank you. So there are, as I mentioned, flexibilities in regular program funding. If you look at PIQs 1202 and PIQT 1901, there's some great resources that provide additional information on activities that can occur within the core program funding. So, we sometimes get applications in for waivers. I can only speak to that there are ideas that you can already do in the program. There might be a referral to an employment program. Those things are already allowed, so you don't really need a waiver to do that. Because child support agencies already can promote economic stability and improve child support outcomes through case management activities, and some of those include, like I mentioned, identifying NCPs that are underemployed or experiencing other social and family circumstances that might be impeding their ability to pay their support, making referrals, like I mentioned, tracking and monitoring payments, tracking NCPs where the court issued an order for directing them to attend a work program, analyzing data, entering documentation in your state system, timely reviews of modifications, and providing specialized enforcement. So, I would really encourage you to look through, before you decide which avenue you may want to or need to travel, to look through either of these PIQs. And if you have some questions, we put some resources here. I know Melissa put a bunch in the chat. We're always available here in DPI, and I know Kimberly's team in DPT and Melissa's group also in DRO. Everyone's super responsive and happy to help out and point you in the right direction. If you even need to, it might just be as simple as implementing an idea right there in your own state that you can do without even us being part of it. But other than that, I appreciate your time, and I'd like to take any questions that you might have.
And real quick before I move to our contact information, I just wanted to mention, as Mike talked about the intensive case management and tracking those payments for people in intensive case management or their activities in a work program. I just wanted to mention, while we talk about these, you may not need, an exemption or a waiver. Sometimes we've also heard from states that's like, well, I need an incentive exemption to do basically that same work because I don't maybe have the 34% program fund for that type of intensive case management. You can still use incentives for that supplemental type activity that goes above and beyond your normal core casework, but it wouldn't necessarily need an exemption to do intensive case management. So I just wanted to point that out because we have seen that as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Kimberly to wrap us up.
I have the most important slide of the whole deck. It's the contact slide. So if you do need more information, of course, you can always check out our website, but all of our contact information is also available on this slide. So feel free to reach out to us at any point in time in the development of any of the projects or plans that you are contemplating. Like Mike said, we are here to basically hold your hand through the whole process and help you out with any questions or planning that you may need.
And I'm just going to put in one other plug. Your regional specialists also stand ready if you want to use them as your first point of contact to bounce ideas off of. But certainly Kimberly, Michael, and I are available. As I mentioned, I will be providing an email that'll go out to all the 4D directors with the slides and with the recording. Give us a couple of weeks to get the transcript ready and 508 compliant, and then we'll get it on the state agency page. So if you're not familiar with our website, on the state agencies page, there is a training section, and you can access trainings that we have recorded, and it will be placed out there on the state agencies page under the training section. All right. We thank you all for attending and hope you have a great holiday season, everyone. Thank you.